Hi everybody, I'm Todd Rogers, and today we're going to talk about how to use people's fear of missing out, or FOMA, against them to motivate them to come to your boring meetings and events. Right? Right. But before we get into that nitty gritty, we've got to learn some other stuff. Like the term affect. Affect is a word that means the expressions of emotions or feelings displayed to others through facial expressions, hand gestures, voice tone, and other emotional signs, like laughter and tears. An affective process or affective processes is the idea that your affect or your emotions and the expressions of your emotions are actually systems that have evolved as part of our early mammalian brains, and they have a very special function in your survival. That function is to facilitate social interactions and to facilitate rapid responses towards potential harmful aspects of the environment. For example, human and non-human primates are highly likely to develop negative affects or affective responses to snakes and spiders, but not flowers and mushrooms. This is because there were early ancestors that had wired responses against spiders and snakes for survival, and that response got passed down. These systems are especially important when a child develops their internal model of social relationship from their early experiences with their primary caregiver. This develops into an attachment style, which we'll talk about in a minute. Scientists like Jar Panksepp, who up until his death in 2017 was one of the leaders in the field of affective neuroscience, argue that these affective processes are instinctual behaviors that evolved long before humans had the ability to think about their emotions. These circuits generate behavioral sequences that can be seen in all mammals and can actually be triggered by electrically stimulating the regions of their brain in those circuit areas. Incidentally, Jar Panksepp was the one that showed that if you tickle rats, they laugh. Panksepp even argued that the rewards and punishments that behaviorists like B.F. Skinner argued condition animal brains to produce behavior responses could not work unless these effective emotion systems weren't already in place. He believed the reason rewards and punishments worked was because they triggered something in the parts of the brain that generate those various emotional responses. Per Panksepp, there are 7 major emotional operating systems defined by genetic coding, but the neural circuits are refined through lived experiences. Panksepp talked about these core emotional processes being like a basic alarm, a primary processing system that he called the brain mind. These were anotic processes in that they were purely experiential and unreflective, such as you would see in a baby. On top of the brain-mind processes are built the secondary noetic processes of learning, memory. Noetic because they involve self-awareness and reflection, such as you might see in a toddler. And at the outermost are the tertiary processes of higher brain function and cognition, or thinking. These are autonoetic in that they involve reflection on past experiences written in memory in an episodic way. These systems, once triggered, are reinforced or cause impacts in the body using neurotransmitters, hormones, or the brain's happy chemicals. 4 of them, seeking system, lust system or arousal system, care or nurturing system, and play or joy system, are considered positive rewarding systems. 3 of them, rage, fear or anxiety, and panic or separation, are considered avoidance systems, approach or avoidance systems. The idea of approach, reward, or avoid will come into play next when we talk about attachment style. Going back to the idea of the early child brain who goes from anoetic consciousness to noetic consciousness, and that transition is modified by its relationship with its primary caregiver. These emotional systems are triggered and reinforced as part of that relationship. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth came up with the original attachment theory in the 50s. In attachment theory, there are 4 basic attachment styles: secure attachment, anxious avoidant attachment, anxious ambivalent attachment, and anxious disorganized attachment. Sometimes they have slightly different names, but they're generally 4 categories. More recent research has identified 3 domains: closeness, comfortability, anxiety, and avoidance. And think of the attachment styles that are formed as a combination of response tendencies around these 3 domains. This means that an individual seldom is 100% in any one of the 4 attachment styles, but perhaps has a stronger tendency for 1 or 2. By the way, if you want to take a look at an online inventory of your own attachment style, pause the video and go to this link right here. Now, a person's attachment style directly relates to how a person experiences the social motivators of social conformity, social exclusion, and loss aversion. Per Verticke and Villemure, attachment styles are built through interactions between personal relationship history and predispositions, and this may influence the encoding of approach versus aversion tendencies, aka safety versus threat, in social encounters. This actually activates regions in the amygdala, hippocampus, striatum, insula, and cingulate limbic areas. In other words, these form your neurological alarm system. Your higher brain then interprets these alarms according to your mental state model and your emotional regulation strategies, which are influenced by your attachment style. Two Italians, Boccata and Capozza, in their study Attachment Styles in Social Groups Review of a Decade, looked at the connection between development psychology and social psychology. Per Boccata and Capozza, attachment is relevant to not only understanding of interpersonal relations, but also to the understanding of individual bonds to groups. This suggests that the key social psychological influences of social conformity, social exclusion, and loss aversion are influenced by one's neural alarm system and its modification through one's attachment style. Social conformity is felt as a pressure of one's group to change a belief or behavior in order to fit in. This pressure can take the form of bullying, persuasion, teasing, criticism, harsh treatment, shunning. I'm sure you've all felt it at some point. Social exclusion is when someone is shunned in social situations within the context that the individual or group is perceived to possess undesirable traits or deemed unworthy of attention. Humans have a strong motivation to avoid loss and the negative emotions associated with that, fear, panic, and they are triggered in situations where an individual perceives they're at risk of loss. Let's bring it all together now to talk about FOMO, or the fear of missing out. What happens when someone is presented with an opportunity for social connection and experiences FOMO is that their neurological alarm systems, particularly the avoidant ones of fear and panic, get triggered. And as they are filtered through their attachment style, they're interpreting that there is a risk of loss in social connection, which again, humans are at pains to avoid, as well as status in the group in which they are members. Depending on the attachment style, they may also be anticipating consequences of social conformity and social exclusion forces in that group. So how might one go about leveraging this information when creating marketing messages for meeting and events? And what are the strategies for not only crafting those messages, but delivering them in a way that takes advantage of the FOMO response? Think of potential attendees as customers, and remember that these customers have an attachment style that combines the avoidance anxiety domains and also the domain for preference around closeness. These translate then into three customer segments: anxious customers, who welcome more frequent contacts with many touch points; secure customers, who are easy to build connection with; and avoidant customers, who may need extra handling to be walked through an attachment process in a way that demonstrates to the customer that one is trustworthy for closeness. In our upcoming training, we're going to break down the steps for crafting marketing messages that speak to each type of attachment style, and then practice creating event and meeting marketing campaigns that work. Thanks. See you then.